Okay, the last example we saw based on we saw a web service call based on NSURLSession. Previously we were using NSURL connection. Even if you refer my website, there is one example which is based off NSURL connection, but starting from iOS 9 it's been deprecated, so it is recommended to use the NSURLSession to access the remote URL. Before that, you have to make the NSURL and NS mutable URL request and define the headers and define the HTTP method and the content length and whatever headers, additional header you need to place in NS mutable URL request along with the body. You make that particular object ready. After that, initiate NSURLSession and initiate a task, and then wait for the response to come. The response code 200 mean you have a valid output coming. So once the output received, and depending on the content, in this case I'm expecting a JSON result. So using a JSON serialization, NS JSON serialization, I can parse the JSON and get the NS dictionary. That NS dictionary I need to identify which data I would like to display. So everything is fine, but when I run this example, we see that I'll try to reproduce the error. We got the result in the log. If you notice that the readable address is already available over here, but the data is not updating in the UI. Even though we have a location info set text something, we are just passing the value whatever I'm displaying in the log, but immediate next line it looks like it is not executed for some time. After some time it works, but the application giving some sort of error or exception issues. If you notice that, let us read. Something went really wrong, looks like. And here it is. This application is modifying the auto layout engine from a background thread. Oh, that's quite serious. It means, yes, this particular block, if you notice, we have a block here. I was already telling this is going to be executed in a different thread because the result arrives at later point of time. So that result is being processed in a different thread, and the result has arrived at this point, no problem. But the location info, this particular object, which is nothing but UI label. I hope you may be knowing it. This is how I defined it. So location info and nothing but a UI label. This UI label, it's in the foreground thread, mean the application whatever it is visible, whereas the particular web service response was received in a different thread because it is going into a different thread, because it is having a block method and taking the processing, those things happens in a different thread. So two different processes cannot communicate each other due to the operational deficiencies. For example, that's what I even call that inter-process communication. So two actively running threads may not have object transmission quite easily as you expect, because those data execution may be happening in a different speed, and this particular foreground may be doing their object the representation in a different ways. For example, if two running objects are traveling in a variable speed, assuming you are one person is driving in a cycle, another person driving in a motorbike, even though it is in the same direction, but the speed varies. So any object or anything you want to communicate between each running object, it's very difficult. So it's the same virtual scenario you have to imagine. The foreground thread runs in a different kind of a speed, or maybe in a different process. The background thread goes in a different process. Both are running in a different instances. The communication between them is really a slightly difficult task, provided the multiple or the different running process brought up into a common point, and then make the communication happen between them. If such a scenario happens, inter-process communication is possible. For example, where the cycle or the bike comes into a common speed and both come into a static, even though they are making a movement, but they somehow maintain the same speed, mean anything communication is possible. So in this case, I have to do the task in order to hand the data to a foreground thread. That's the reason it is breaking. In iOS, there is an option, dispatch, of course, dispatch main. This method can call the foreground thread, or it can make the communication between the different thread to a foreground thread. So how I am going to do, get dispatch, get main queue, the current thread, and there is one more block method so that the particular object can go to the main thread, I mean the foreground thread. The block method usually contains simple method signature. In fact, it is going to be void. This guy is complaining. Is there any issues? Okay, that's not an issue. Is there any for loop? Is it dispatch main queue? Once again. Complaining me some sort of issues. What exactly will identify? Block. I really don't see an issue here. Let me see what exactly there are. Okay, the method was wrong. It is actually dispatch asynchronous. So okay, got it away. Dispatch sync, dispatch get main queue, and the block to hand over the data to the parent queue. Okay, so now this dispatch async will make sure you make the communication to the foreground thread, then you can safely assign the values which was received from a different thread. So this is somewhere, this particular dispatch async makes sure both the processes meet in some sort of common point and the data transmission happens in between them. So it is always recommended, if you are doing some sort of UI manipulation which is directly based on the results coming from web service, it is recommended to use the dispatch async, because the process, the web service process the URL response in a different thread, because as soon as the URL been called, it goes into a different process and executed. If it is been in the current thread, the application might have stuck and wouldn't have allowed the particular application to respond to user interaction until the response is arrived. So this particular method, dispatch async, makes sure the current thread, the foreground thread, and the thread which the NSURL response, process, both come into a common point and gives you a space where you can transfer the data to a main thread. So this particular line, once we add it, let me see. Now see the results immediately coming, and it doesn't take a time. As soon as the log printed, the value easily displayed. So it doesn't stuck, and even it did not force close. So that's the reason, because I was trying to access an UI or an element which is defined in interface builder and which is in the foreground, and it was modified by an object arriving from a different thread. So that's the reason it was breaking. Now we put into a dispatch async and make sure both the processor meet into a common point. And here I would like to put a alert control. The UI alert controller is a mix of two. One is the wrapper which carries the message and the title. Another one, the action buttons which could influence the alert controller, either dismiss the alert controller in such a way. So something, initialize it. Alert controller with the title, say done, say location, whatever. Message, this is the message you would like to display on the alert view controller or alert controller. I would like to display this particular data which is coming from a web service. And the style, that's a constant UI alert. It's not action controller style alert. That's it. Now I've defined the UI alert controller. So this alert controller is going to have an action button, UI alert action. Probably we'll keep a OK button. So UI alert action, initialize action with the title. I mean, what you really do want to display on the button. Display OK. Alert action style. Probably this particular style I'm going to use it to dismiss my alert view. So you can alert action style default and cancel, which whatever you prefer. Cancel will slightly have a bold text. The default will have a kind of a normal text, nothing else, but it's not going to influence any kind of design events, because it's just a theme, it's a style. Okay, handler is a block. Has the UI alert action. Okay, let me put a caret symbol to start with. If you want to do some sort of changes or do some code execution here, you can do that when the user click on OK button. But at this point I really don't want to do anything, just I leave it as it is. So handle events after pressing OK, if at all, if you have anything. Okay, now action has been defined. Now connect with the alert controller. Alert controller, add action. Okay, action. So this alert controller is going to have an action button OK in this case. Now fire the alert controller so that it could display self present view controller. Present view controller. It's called alert controller. Some small animation. Animation means some sort of a zippy effect. No block to capture once it is presented. So now when I present the alert controller, it will also have a alert action button. Okay, so along with that, it is going to display the title of the alert controller plus the data received from web service as a message. So let's see how it looks like. See that the data is displayed in the alert controller. So the data, this is the title, this is the message, and the action button. Okay, you can add as many as action buttons, like you can create as many as action buttons and have them attached to. We usually keep OK and cancel. I make the style as a default one so that we see the difference. So this one, usually the cancel takes a precedence because of obvious reason. It's a one-handed operation that Apple maintains some sort of design strategy. Okay, apart from that, you can add one more button, then the button will be in the horizontally, so vertically placed one if you add more buttons. So usually you can easily define an alert controller with the action buttons. So an alert controller contains a title and the message and the action button. Action buttons can also have an event listener as a block method. Nothing but a handler. Whenever OK or cancel is pressed, you can handle the event accordingly. For example, after clicking it, you will call another web service and go to some other view controller. Whatever you like to do at this point, you can very well handle the events. So alert controller pretty easy as far as iOS is concerned. It's quite easy. And the next one we have picker view. Picker view. Before that, why don't we merge these code into a protocol delegate one so that we can reuse it as many as possible instead of having this way of calling the web service. So I'll come back to alert picker view a little later, because since we are discussing the web services, we'll make sure those things automated in such a way. Okay, maybe I create it over here itself. User interface. So create a class. Say I'm going to say web service. It's going to be this time an NS object, inheriting from an NS object, so that it will have all the required objects inherited from NS object, which is a base for your Coca Touch framework. Next, create the file. So you have been given a header and implementation file. Okay, now I would like to have a protocol defined. Protocols, nothing but the interfaces in Java concerned, in this case Objective-C, the file which only contains header, it doesn't contain the implementation, because interfaces does not contain an active body where methods could implement it. So interfaces typically used as a connecting objects. For example, it can communicate between different classes when certain longer running processes associated. In fact, if you notice that here some sort of process stuff already has come, because already we are into a trouble because handing over the task to a different different processes. So in such a case, the protocols and the delegate strategy will work out, and things will be pretty it could be made in such a way you can reuse it as much as possible instead of defining everywhere. So let me add the protocol can be a separate class, or a protocol can be defined in any header as an inner class as well. because it's going to be only the I'm going to define it as a what do you call, I'm going to define here itself instead of separate class or separate header alone. So let me class, sorry, protocol name, we will define it as a so this is a protocol where I am going to keep like a method which is incomplete body. Sorry. If you really want to return anything, that also you can do. Shouldn't we return a NS string? Return NS dictionary. Okay. Okay. So this particular, sorry, highly influential from a JavaScript. I was working on JavaScript in the morning session. So okay. So in this case, it is going to hand over the response received from a web service to a different classes or different class wherever the protocol and the delegate is being implemented. So I just kept a method which is going to work in this way. Okay. And implemented. Since I don't know the type of the delegate or what kind of object it is, I can define it as a ID. I already explained about the significance of ID. If you are not sure about the particular class, what kind of object it is going to return, you can define it as an ID. I was even telling, while you parse your JSON object or typically NS dictionary, if a NS dictionary wants, while you iterate, sometimes it may give a string, sometimes it may give a NS dictionary, sometimes it may give a boolean. So in every iteration, if you get a different data type, you can safely capture them in a generic data object called ID, and you can process for further requirement. Okay, so the delegate and other methods should be implemented now. Let's synthesize it. Okay, now a generic class with a protocol has been written. This protocol can be called wherever needed in a scenario which I am going to make this particular web service call as a reusable one. Let me see how can it do it. So this particular part, this view controller, we are calling a web service. So there are a lot of lines, a lot of informations are there in this. The URL, okay, URL needed, payloads needed, method needed. Most of the stuffs, for example, we can get the HTTP method as an argument. We'll get the URL as an argument and the payloads, that's also as an argument, so that we can reuse it wherever the web service requirement comes. So let me create a method. Remember, this is a header, not the implementation file. URL and what else? What else? URL method payloads. Today I was highly influenced by the JavaScript. I'm losing my syntaxes. Okay, I define a method. Recall back a method way. C. These are all because this kind of issues you will often encounter where you switch between different languages. Okay, a method name. This particular method is going to expect 3 arguments. All the 3 being in a string, no problem. One, you need to supply the URL. Second one, which HTTP method you are trying to call, and the payload which you are trying to send. And that's this fine. This looks fine. Now implement them. Okay. This is a place we are going to implement everything. So first part we have to build the NS URL. First argument used. Or the URL. Okay. I'll make it as a WS URL. Name conflicts coming. NS mutable NS URL URL request. Initialize the request. Request with the URL and all blah blah we have to do. This is URL we have ready. Cache policy. This cache policy is slightly NS URL HTTP URL protocol, some sort of protocol okay, I'll just get it from the previous one. Can anybody tell me what is that? NS HTTP or URL protocol cache policy something. NS URL request. This is a nesty constants. Okay. Fine. And we have a time interval. We usually give it 240 as a fixed value. Okay. Now define the what do you call it? Since it's a mutable one, we can define it HTTP method. So method is arriving from an argument. Good. Okay. And set various other values which is required for HTTP header. So first one, the content type, which is the constant application /x xww form. This is a constant defined by HTTP. All we need to just know about, there are various various HTTP headers possible. Your RESTful document will contain which header need to be sent. So you don't need to remember or memorize these things. If you are given a RESTful documentation where which URL needs to be called, they will also mention about which header type you need to send. Those things you are going to simply define here. We have various headers such as JSON, multipart, multi-part elements which would be useful while you are sending image data. Assuming you took a picture from your camera, that picture you'd like to send it to server. In that case, you can use a multi-part form. So that case, you can use a different header. Okay. Another one, content length. Okay. Here, we need to decide about the payload first, then we'll think about doing this one. First thing, string length of your payload, and what else? String with the format %d. You may need a typecasting. Done. If you are putting a LD long integer, make sure you typecast it so long, whatever. You need it in a string format, so the length of the payload in a string format. That's the reason I am just converting. Had it been Java, the polymorphism would have come in place. Anything gets concatenated, the string will become a string, but in this case it is not. So payload length, which is a numeral, which is a number, has to be converted into a string. That's the reason I'm using NS string with a string format and make that particular thing as a string. Then setting the value, and this particular header is content length. Okay, and finally set the body, usually the payload itself. So request set HTTP body, the payload. So in this example, which I have used a URL as a total, but I'm going to split them into a slightly different way, because first I'm going to send the URL unknown, the second I'm going to send the payloads, because we have made the class which is going to be reusable and can also be used. Wait, this guy is complaining. Payload need to be an NS data type. This is a new for me. We'll come back. Okay, finally NS session. This particular payload has to be converted into a NS data type. So payload get data, it's a string. We see how I did in my previous example. Okay. From the payload, data using encoding, that payload can be allow loss, this is not needed section. So this particular string, it's still complaining me. Oh, this has to be seen. Okay, it's the encoding type. Okay, NS UTF. Yeah. So encode as UTF-8. Okay, this particular string. Remember, while you send a form to a set through HTTP, it has to be encoded in such a way it does not contain special character. For example, if you notice the URLs, for example, it is calling the URL. If you build a URL in such a way, this is up to just before the question mark, it is a URL. What is followed after the question mark? The payloads. So in this case, two payloads are going, the user and the pass, which is having attribute user going to contain the value dev, and pass is going to contain the value state. So in this case, sometime a malfunction encoding is also possible. For example, sometime you may do some sort of malfunctioned URLs which is not allowed, will tend to break your application. So in such a case, sorry, not that particular spaces. So the space you could have noticed, if the URL encounters such a space, it will encode something like 20% or something, some sort of encode, so that the particular blank space can also be sent to the server. This particular encoding would be done by this particular way. So NSUTF-8 string, so you will encode with the standard HTTP type, so that any kind of error would not happen. So that encoding, for that purpose, we are making sure we build the NS data object and encode the payload into a UTF-8 format. So once you are done, that data could be sent to the server. Data to be sent. Now everything looks fine. And what else we have? All we need to call the session and initiate the job. So make NS URL session, initiate the session, from the shared session, and you are going to initiate NS URL session task from the session data. Make the request with the task, and there are various other methods also there. Response. Okay, the request parameter, which we have it as a request. Completion handler is a block which gives me a 3 argument in my understanding. So block, caret symbol, data which is handed over, and NS URL. Let's see that that's a URL response as another one, so that we can retrieve the status code, and the final one NS error to handle the errors. Of course, the different thread is going to be running in a different thread. We'll see what kind of scenario we are going to encounter at this point. Then you build NS URL. Which one we need a what is that? NSURL HTTP response we want. So, which is actually as a typecasting of the existing NSURL response. Sorry, response. Then check the status code. Equals 200 means we have a valid response arrived. Else something went wrong. Okay, using the response, let us build the NS dictionary. NS dictionary. The response being JSON. So I'm going to make a NS JSON serialization. JSON object with the data. The data is available as an argument from a block method and mutable container. NS JSON reading mutable containers. Error, we don't have error object to handle here. Define the error. Now we are done. We have NS dictionary at one point of time. Sorry, this is a different error. We receive the NS dictionary from the server at one point of time with a valid task hasn't been initialized. Okay, that's very important. Task receive. Until you call this line, the entire block will not be even executed. So the session task set receive. So this particular method which you have written in this particular class is going to expect a URL HTTP method and the payloads to be sent in a string formats. Once it is received, it is going to make a web service call and create a NS dictionary at one point of time. Hand over the NS dictionary, we'll see whether the thread errors are coming in after testing it. So beyond to this point, delegate, which the object which we have already created, get response from a server, hand over them. This is the problem. We don't have a setter. Where it is? Get response from a server. Okay, we have to make in a different way so that the dictionary could be handed over to the thread. So this particular thing we would send it as an argument. So let us slightly make from the delegate response. You're calling that delegate method and giving them as a argument. Okay, now what way it is going to be helpful for me? Now wherever I need a web service call, I don't need to write so and so and so on line. What I am going to do, let me remove it, except the URL. I'll create one more view controller instead of disturbing it, because we have a alert controller also in this example. Okay, we'll keep the alert controller alone. First thing, let me call this web service class in this view controller. Where is that? Header. I'm going to implement in header, call the import in header. I usually call in the implementation file, but this time I'm going to call it in the header file. So once I import it, I can call the web service delegate, because the web service H contains a protocol which is called web service delegate. Once I call it, and also probably I'm going to need a property, that is a different case, but let me come. This guy is doing some sort of thing. For example, it is giving me method get response from server is not implemented because I added a delegate. Delegate contains a incomplete method which has to be implemented, and it is giving me an alert. So I have to put somewhere in the implementation. I usually have a habit of putting pragma mark. Implement the method. We have the method implemented here. Now define a property. Call this property, synthesize it if required. I'm going to move this alert control stuff, or maybe this particular dictionary and all the stuff. Okay, this is where the dictionary arrives. So I'm just going to move all these things to here. This dispatch async, for time being I'm going to disable it. Something wrongly copy pasted, I hope. Let me identify from where I need to copy. From here, just go ahead till the else block. Up to this fine. So I'm moving this to here. In this case, the dictionary arrives from an argument. The dispatch async, for time being I'll disable it because I would like to test whether it is needed or not. If required, the dispatch async stuff will define in the web service delegate itself, not here. So now we are not going to need this one. all mutable requests and all the stuff I'm going to remove. It's fine. Now the web service part moved to a different class. All we need to consume it wherever required. So initialize the web service. Initialize the class, that is very important. It is like a new class name. Now web service has a method call. What's the method we kept? Call web service with the URL that has been defined and has been implemented. That's fine. Cancel previous requirement with lowercase. Yeah. So this URL we are going to access at this point. The URL nothing but this one. Up to this one is a URL. The method is going to be get, and the payloads, of course, the payload we have to separate. In this case, this one. In this way I can make it. If this thing does not work, probably we'll move this part also with this URL. That's it, because I need to know the payload length so that the same one I can use it for post as well. So I just try to make it as a reusable one. Before calling the web service, you have to attach the set delegate to self, because the web service delegate has been implemented in this class, because the self terms, this particular delegate has been implemented here. So this delegate will receive the response once the process is completed, and it will call the get response from server method. That method has been implemented in this particular view controller itself. So at one point of time you should be able to receive the response here for the method what you call here. So at this point this particular thing will be executed in a different class. When the class receives the response, it will hand over the response to here wherever you implemented. So whatever, how many times you want a different calling, you can keep calling initialize the web service object and call it and receive the response accordingly. You can have as many as different methods, and those methods could be implemented here, and the subsequent response you can also arrive at it. But before that, let me check. Seriously, something not looking good. Is there any NS log to test it? Here is there. This variable is not going to be used now. Where are we calling web service log init set? I get call web service with the URL. Maybe something going wrong here. Let me put a breakpoint to identify my method reaches to this point or not. I need to identify them. Putting the breakpoints. Okay, it comes here. Next, it is not reaching this block. So the status code something retrieving wrong. So let us identify what is the status code. We run more time. NS object. Okay, I'll do one thing. Just need to know what is this value. Next. Okay, so some reason it is not going here. So as I expected, the URL may be slightly wrong. What I'm going to do, put this thing into here. Okay, goes then yeah, it called the delegate and I got the result. Okay, because of the URL malfunction, but anyway, we got the result, but the exception is being thrown because of the obvious reason. It is calling from a different thread. So that we have to adjust the code. So let me remove the breakpoints. You know that if you encounter some issue when you have a suspicion over whether certain method blocks are not being called, you can put a breakpoint and check whether the code reaches to that particular line. So I just verified, and it was because of the reason the URL was wrong. Now we have to add the dispatch async. Dispatch get main queue and the block method. This one is actually missing anything. Void bracket is wrongly placed. Okay, this one is not needed. Okay. So now I can hand over this to the main thread. So instead of putting that dispatch async every time, I put it over here. So let me see if the results are arriving. Now we got it without any issue. So this is a standard way. So create a class with the delegate and process that particular web service when the result is arrived, hand over the result to a UI or maybe the view controller wherever needed. In this case, I have used a delegation or a kind of a delegate which is called web service delegate, and that protocol, the delegate incomplete method, has been implemented over here in order to bring the data after calling the web service, and we bring the data over here. So since it is a get method, I don't need to send payload because the payloads are going to be traveled in the URL itself. If it is a post method, yes, the payload has to be mentioned, and this one should contain post. So in this case, the payloads, what we can do, probably add one, what is that, where is the web service M? You can create a function which is called call web service using get, so that which only takes a get related information, and you can also create one more method which is called call web service using post. That will need a payload information additional. So what we can do, we can modify the function name get or post. Accordingly we can handle the events. For example, if I make this one as a post, the method is going to be always post, which we don't need it. So this will do the job. And you can also create one more function which is called with get, which does not require the payload. So we create two methods. I'm not going to need a payload length and blah blah stuff for this one. Because the data is going to be traveling in the URL itself. So I have just modified the method signature. You have to update them in the header. And this one has become so just both the method signature has been changed, so you can use the modified one here. This will do the job. If at all you have a web service, call web service with a post, you can add the additional payload information because the post would require a payloads. So you can modify the method signature however way you want, so that this particular class work as per your requirement, so that you can reuse it n number of time wherever the web service calls being required. I'm going to use I use this kind of strategy because the subsequent example, which is going to be dealing more on the web service, so it is better to have such a way of keeping the code separated to each other, so that the logic is kept and which is reused as many number of time. So probably you can modify, if you are going to send a different header, you can introduce a new function and you use it, or maybe with the same function with a different argument you want, overload the method. Whatever way your object oriented program allows you to do, you can handle them. So I just kept the code in such a way, organized the code in such a way, the web service part written in the separate class. The class contains a protocol. So the protocol contains a delegate function which is going to work as a communicator between the class. So this delegate, once the result received from the web service, hand over that particular data to the place wherever it is implemented. In this case, it has been implemented here. How it was implemented? Because once I import the web service, I added that particular web service delegate here. Since the delegate was added, the incomplete methods should be implemented in the class. So it has been implemented. It is giving me a place, like it is going to receive the callback as soon as the web service complete the task. Then the control will come here with the values. You may be wondering there is no connection between them, but here it is, because the delegate has been implemented. I am telling this delegate is here. The set delegate, remember the set delegate method was added because of the synthesizer. If you notice that this object contains just delegate. Since I synthesize, the setter method would have got added. So I was telling about the synthesize does the setter getter stuff internally. That's the reason you are able to call set delegate method here. If you are using dot notation, you can simply call delegate set. You can define in this way. But I really wanted to do in the pure Objective-C type. So that's the reason I'm trying to show you. Okay, set delegate is being done. So this particular delegate has been implemented here. So the delegate receive the message as soon as the web service complete the task, and finally we have a response at this point. This is the integration of protocol and delegate with the web service. This particular example, I'll just a little bit clean it up, because the last example which is already there, we really don't want this much of information. So we made the code much cleaner. The dispatch sync, that's also not needed. Now we have the alert controller. Whenever the result received, we will get the alert controller. UI alert controller, as well as the data being updated to the label. Okay, so this is done. And we have only one recap on picker view. Okay, that also I'll complete it. Or probably I'll do it tomorrow. It looks like I'm overloading you guys.